Welcome to CMS, Charlotte Motor Speedway in the Piedmont of the Carolinas. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and for many years this track has belonged to the stock car drivers of NASCAR, but now it's an IRL track as well, and Bruton Smith, the owner, and his general manager, Humpy Wheeler, are always looking for new innovations, new ways to make the racing show better, and they've done it here. Night racing. Not just a bunch of floodlights placed up on the grandstand, but a very expensive, very sophisticated system to give even light throughout the racetrack and make sure there's never a glint of a spotlight in a driver's eyes. It's going to make an interesting challenge.
Well, it'll be fun to watch. I think actually the drivers might be faster at night because if you can't see what you're doing, you usually go a little faster.
1.5 miles around here, fairly flat course, and a course that tends to have some ripples in it, which will make it very interesting for these low-riding IRL cars.
Well, it'll be a handling track because the surface will be a lot rougher than some of the tracks they run on. The banking will be higher, and it's going to mean a lot of exciting racing to watch.
All right, let's go now to Jackaroo. ABC Sports is in the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World Speedway. Hello and welcome. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and this is one of the most unusual tracks in the IRL series. It's really a three-turn track with a little dogleg in the back.
It's got a dogleg, but two of those turns are actually flat out. The driver never lifts, so it really comes down to turn one and how quick he can get back on the power on the exit of turn one.
And then the banking changes. It's fairly steep in turn one. In turn two, it drops down to 8.5 degrees, 7 degrees in turn three. So what do you do to win this thing?
Well, the key to this racetrack is how you drive the traffic situation. You're going to have lap cars. I mean, there's going to be guys at the front and guys at the back, but it's so tight, it's so fast, you get out of the throttle one time, and you lose a lot of time on the racetrack. So it's a traffic track. Who can manage the traffic the best is going to run up front.
You know, and Disney World has its characters. We have one, too. Here's Jackaroo. We're right on the border between Ohio and Indiana, a little bit outside of Rossburg, Ohio, and we're at Eldora. Now, if you're going to learn how to be a real race driver and you're going to want to run in the IRL and the Indianapolis 500, then this is one of those great Midwestern tracks where you're really needed to learn how to ply your trade and craft as a race driver.
Well, not only that, but you wore the helmet not only for protection in case you had an accident, but to protect you against the rocks and flying debris that you receive at a high speed for a high-bank dirt track.
And Johnny Rutherford, the great three-time Indianapolis 500 champion, one time flipped out of this place, and they couldn't find him for a few minutes. When they did, well, he was injured seriously, 2 broken arms. But, you know, he's proud of his run at Eldora. Hello and welcome. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and we're at the world's greatest race course, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. This is the crown jewel in the IRL series. And as a matter of fact, on race day, this is the largest single-day spectator sporting event in the world. The crowd is absolutely massive.
Well, Paul, this is a place where you have to manage your emotions. The adrenaline flow is just so great at the beginning of this race that you've got to slow yourself down. It's no problem psyching yourself up for the Indy 500.
The track is 2.5 miles around, a mere 50 feet wide, 5/8 of a mile on the long straightaways, and it's only banked 9 degrees.
Well, you pretty much have to run the place flat out to try to go fast, obviously. It's very symmetric, but with weather conditions and 500,000 people around that racetrack on race day, there's a lot of things you have to comprehend.
Let's go down to the pits and check in with Jackaroo. Indianapolis Raceway Park, one of the first multi-purpose racing facilities in the United States. Hi, I'm Paul Page with Indy 500 champion Tom Sneva. And IRP was built back in the early 60s. The first concept of adding an oval, a road course, and a drag strip all together. Well, that drag strip now yearly hosts the great U.S. Nationals over the Labor Day weekend. And the road course, 2.5 miles around, has seen some great drivers from names like Indy 500 champion Jimmy Clark down to, Paul Page has a few thousand miles around here in his Formula Ford as well. But we're talking today about the 5/8 of a mile oval, and this is part of the whole training ground of short tracks that will lead drivers up on the path to the Indianapolis 500 and the IRL.
Well, no question about IRP being a place to sort of groom yourself for a place like Indianapolis. Very similar, sort of a flat track, a handling track, a track where you get to experience a lot of traffic, and that's probably the key to improving your skills to get to a place like Indianapolis.
And thousands of drivers have spent hour upon hour honing their skills on a track like this. Welcome to New England. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and we're at New Hampshire International. This is a terrific racetrack. It's nestled in a wonderfully scenic setting, and it is a track that serves the spectators and racers alike just perfectly.
Well, it's a multi-purpose facility. It's got the oval as well as a road course, so they race just about everything here, from go-karts through NASCAR and all the way to Indianapolis.
Now, this track is just a little over 1 mile long. It's nice and wide, 80 feet wide most of the way around, and it's banked at 12 degrees in 2 corners at either end of the long straightaways.
Well, it's what we refer to as a bull ring. It's one of the shorter tracks that we run on, but it's a track where if you get the car handling proper, you don't have to have the most horsepower, and you can still go to the front.
Now, let's go to the pits and check in with Jack Arute. Welcome to the gambling mecca of Las Vegas. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and this is Las Vegas International. It's really on the outskirts of Vegas, right across the street from the great Nellis Air Force Base with its fighters running in and out all day. And this is a multi-purpose facility, one that in fact the IRL Series is very proud to be at. It is dubbed a track for the next century.
Well, it's a complex for the next century. They've got the 1.5 mile high-speed oval. You've got a half-mile dirt track. They've got the drag strip. They've got the road course. Every type of racing imaginable you're going to see at the Las Vegas racetrack.
The track is 1.5 miles around. The turns are banked at 12 degrees. It's really a tri-oval a la NASCAR. The pit road runs from one turn all the way to the other, and that creates the triangle that's at the center of the track.
Well, and it's such a high-speed racetrack that there's no room for error. These drivers have to be on their tiptoes at all times. Small mistakes are magnified when you're running at 200 miles an hour.
And there isn't a bad seat in the place. Let's go down now to Jack Arute. This is the Mile in the Desert. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva. Phoenix International Raceway, PIR. It is one of the greatest tracks ever built, and it was built years and years ago and has a magnificent history.
Well, it really does, Paul. All the Ensers have driven there, and there's not a lot of those racetracks still left on our circuit that all the Ensers have raced on. But a lot of great tradition, a great driver's racetrack.
It is one that in the early days saw the roadster racing here and then the transition to the rear engine car like we're going to see today. And no one has won more or been better at it than Tom Sneva. He's the master of the mile at Phoenix. So, Tom, how do you win this thing?
Well, you run up front towards the end of the race is how you do it, Paul. But, again, this is a driver's racetrack. You sort of put the spurs on and dig the spurs in the side of the race car and just attack the race course. Again, traffic's a big problem. Getting through turns 1 and 2 is probably the real key to going fast at Phoenix.
And how far ahead do you have to be looking to be able to make a pass here?
Well, that's a big key to what happens. You've got to look way ahead, actually, but you've got to see what traffic's doing both in front of you and back of you, and not just 1 or 2 cars, but you've got to anticipate what might happen in the next 2 or 3 laps.
All right, let's go down and check with our colleague, Jack Arute. Welcome to picturesque Colorado. This is Pikes Peak International, a brand new racetrack. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and this track gives you an idea of some of the magnificent growth in motorsports across the board and the IRL in particular. A 1 mile tri-oval.
I think it's a place where no driver is going to have a big advantage. It's new to everybody, and so who can adapt the quickest to a new facility is a guy that's going to run up front.
And with Pikes Peak itself as a backdrop, many of the racers throughout history have come here to run up the hill, as they call it, but now they have an actual full-purpose facility. How do you figure out a new race course?
Well, it's real difficult because you don't have a big, thick book of past experience on a particular racetrack. So, again, who can adapt the quickest? Who has a basic setup that they'll draw off either the Phoenix racetrack or the Loudon racetrack? They'll maybe use that as a baseline to start with, and whoever guesses the closest with the most practice time is going to have an advantage.
All right, let's go to Jackaroo. ABC Sports is in the heart of Texas. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and we're at Texas International, a brand new facility, part of that growth across the country of motorsports that is stimulated in part by the presence of the Indy Racing League. Now, this track is located about 15 miles north of Fort Worth. It's 20 miles over to the center of Dallas. Couldn't be better situated with an exit right off of the interstate. So it's easy to get in and out of, and once you're in the track, it's one of the greatest facilities going with so many accommodations you can't imagine how well it is built. The track and the race. The race, 500 kilometers, a little bit over 300 miles. You drive that differently.
Well, you really do. It's not like a 500-mile race. Obviously, it's more of a sprint race. You've got to run hard all day, and the younger driver maybe can run with the veteran driver because he doesn't have to have that concentration for 3.5 hours. This is going to be like a 2-hour race.
And it is great to see a big facility like this back in Texas. Texas race fans are some of the best in the world, but it's been a while since they've had an opportunity.
The Indy cars were there probably 20 years ago, a little bit south, halfway between Houston and Dallas, and we had some great races down there, but I think the Texas crowd is excited about seeing racing coming back to the Texas area.
And you did pretty good at those races in your day, didn't you?
Well, it was a fast racetrack, and I was a lot younger then, so you were braver than you were smart.
Fast racetrack for a fast man. That's what this one is. Let's go to Jackaroo. Terre Haute, the action track. Hi, I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and this is a perfect half mile. Banked about 8 degrees, and it's dirt. Real clay, really. And Tom Sneva has never really raced on the dirt, but you've seen a lot here.
I have seen a lot, but like a lot of drivers, you're not exposed to things that aren't in your area as you're growing up. But Terre Haute, tremendous, traditional old half-mile dirt track. You don't use the brakes, you just throw the car sideways to slow it down in the corner. But a great training place for number 1, traffic, and number 2 is car control.
And if you haven't seen something like A.J. Foyt climb in a sprinter and get up on the cush, you have not really seen racing. Back home again in Indiana. I'm Paul Page with Tom Sneva, and we're at Winchester. Now, this is a half mile. It's one of the oldest racetracks in the world, nearly as old as the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, over 80 years old, in fact. And there are a lot of people who say, to run Winchester, you got to be crazy.
Well, I don't know about crazy, but you're not a real race driver unless you've experienced this at least one time. I mean, this is like an 8-second ride. It's like riding the bull. You know, you need to put your spurs on and hope that you keep contact with the side of the race car because it's fast, it's high bank, it's paved, but you wouldn't know it a lot of the time. And some of the spectators in the early rows, I think, would have to sit back just a little bit to watch this place.
Yeah, you've got to be brave even to be a spectator at Winchester, but believe me, if you have that kind of courage, you're always treated to one terrific race.
One of the most distinctive features of these cars is the area behind the driver's head. It's called a cold air box. What it does is air is forced through that opening directly into a system that goes into the carburation, increases the horsepower on these engines, and makes for some very fast speeds. The engines beneath the bonnet of these cars, very potent packages. 2.5 liters, normally aspirated. They start life basically the same sort of engine you might have in your passenger car. But once they've been reworked by these engine manufacturers, they put out incredible horsepower. While these chassis create a lot of downforce, they still fit within the open wheel configuration that we're so used to in IndyCar racing. But the package is much more manageable. They respond better to changes made both by the driver and the crew during the course of the race. What that means is closer competition and also the opportunity for each individual team to dial in their car for maximum performance. When you take a look at the engine package for this series, you may begin to think, gee, that's a lot like the engine that's in my car. Well, you're close. They both start out as 4-liter normally aspirated engines, but then the engine builders go to work, putting special racing componentry into this engine that creates additional horsepower. It is normally aspirated and uses a rev limiter to control the maximum revs for each engine. With the similarities in the engine and chassis package, A premium is put upon the driver's performance. No longer can he rely upon an engineer to be able to fashion a mount that's quicker. Now it all rests in the seat. The concept of the Indy Racing League was simply put to make this a driver's series. Now how to go about that? Try and make the rules evenly applied from the front to the back of the field. Come up with a standardized package for engines and chassis. That's precisely what they've done. Now, the performance is based upon the performance of the driver, the performance of the pit crew. How well they respond to changing race conditions oftentimes determines how well they finish. The premise of this series was to create a more even playing field for individual drivers. The thought process being, if you can limit the type of equipment and the sophistication of that equipment, the premium will be put back upon the driver's performance. Thus far, with the engine and rules combinations, that's precisely what we've seen. It all now depends just how quick the driver is inside the cockpit. These IRL cars use space-age technology not only to go fast, but to be safe. Carbon fiber, monocoque construction, Kevlar, the same thing that you use in bulletproof vests, all critical elements in the design of the chassis. Also, where the driver is positioned is important. The feet are now behind the front axle. The wheels, if they should come off the car, come up, and if they get into the driver's area, higher sidewalls on the driver's shoulders inside the cockpit often will deflect that wheel, keeping it out of the inside of the cockpit and keeping the driver a lot safer. The escalating spiral of costs have oftentimes put talented drivers on the sidelines, making first-class rides unavailable to them. Not in the Indy Racing League. If you take a look at a starting field, many of these drivers are graduates of midgets, sprint cars, USAC Silver Crown, open cockpit racing from around the country. All of those drivers now can look to the Indy Racing League as a road to the Indianapolis 500. With a limited number of engine packages and a like limit upon the chassis choices, this is made for closer competition in the Indy Racing League. No longer can you go out and commission an engineer to build a car that is specific for your team. Now you have to race the same thing as your competitor, and the premium is put on how well you can develop that package.
Well, the weather is good here right now, but there is a forecast that includes the possibility of rain sometime during the run here today. So we'll be keeping an eye on that for you. That could end this race prematurely should it come to pass. Well, it's hot. Very hot. Incredibly hot. Now, that's going to make it uncomfortable for the fans, but perhaps even more important is it's going to be very uncomfortable in the cockpit. These drivers with those triple layer suits on will get a temperature inside the cockpit of up to 106, 110 degrees. And the equipment itself, well, the tires don't react well to that much ambient heat, especially since it's also heating up the racetrack. And tire wear is going to become absolutely critical. For the engines, well, it's a little thinner air, and they don't like to carburate really hot air, so we might see a difference there as well. Well, while it's relatively warm right now, there's a cold front scheduled to come through this area during the race itself, and of course that will change track conditions drastically. It will mean thicker, denser, cooler air, more power for the engines, and the driver that really looks ahead and tries to use this cold front to his advantage will probably come home in winner's circle. Well, it's cold right now, but as the sun gets higher in the sky, we expect it to warm up here considerably. So if you're going to run fast, you need to do it right now, because a little bit later in the day, that track's going to get greasy with the heat, and the engines aren't going to be nearly as powerful. This is an absolutely perfect day for racing. The temperature is comfortable, the humidity is down, the skies are bright and blue, not a cloud in sight, and the sun is just sparkling off of these IRL cars. Well, it's windy here today, and remember, these IRL cars are aerodynamic animals, and if the wind hits them at the wrong direction, it can have a very definite effect on how they perform. The wind can actually, at time to time, pick the race car up and just move it over a couple of feet on the racetrack. And when you're planning an exit to a turn that takes you within a foot of the wall, you can't have a 2-foot error.
The first 200-mile-an-hour lap at Indy was very rewarding for me. I was actually the B driver on a team that the A driver was Mario Andretti. A lot of the guys in happy hour were running the 198s or 199s real close to 200 miles an hour. We'd been doing most of our practice in the middle of the day in the temperatures that we thought it was going to be when we had to go qualify. And we were running a couple miles an hour slower than that. It was so bad that finally, the day before qualifying, my team suggested I put Mario Andretti's setup on my car and try that. Well, we did that. I ran 3 laps, very quick. Probably would have been a new track record for a practice day, but I didn't get through the 4th turn. We actually spun the car, knocked both right side wheels off. The team worked all night to put that car back together and get it ready for qualifying. As they put it back together, I suggested to them that why don't we put the setup that I was more comfortable with on that race car for qualifying. They did that. We went out and were the only person to run 200 miles an hour on that day. Winning Indy was a big moment for us. It didn't happen till late in the race. I had a race car that was just average on speed when we were full of fuel. But as the fuel ran out of my car got faster. As the fuel ran out of the competition's car, their cars got slower. So I was quick at the end of a segment, but not nearly as quick when we were full of fuel. Late in the race, I had to negotiate by a lot of traffic. I wasn't leading the race because we had a poor pit stop, and it dropped me 5 or 6 positions behind. It wasn't till very late in the race that as the fuel went down, my car got quick enough that I was able to catch the guys in traffic, get by, and win the Indy 500.
Believe it or not, your passenger car may create less drag than this Indy Racing League car. Now, why is that? Well, your car has body panels surrounding the tires. These big tires on these Indy cars create a lot of drag. That's why teams have had to introduce wings. They create additional stability and additional downforce. Makes the car go a lot quicker. Imagine what your car would be like if you had some wings.
The wings on an IRL car help determine how much downforce that car produces. Downforce is related to corner speed. The more downforce you have, the faster you should be able to drive that car through the corner. The negative of more wing angle, however, is slower straightaway speeds. You get more cornering speed with more wing. The more wing you have, the more drag the car produces, and therefore your straightaway speed is reduced. Now, if the car is pushing or what we call understeering, it's therefore not turning the direction that you want it to go. If you experience that problem, you have to put more front wing angle into the car. By doing that, you cause more traction in the front of the car now will track as you point it. If the car is oversteering, or what we call a loose condition, as you enter the corner, you make a turning input, and the car actually feels like it wants to turn more than what you input into the steering wheel. That's a loose condition. What you need to do then is one of 2 things. Either add rear wing to get more downforce in the back of the car, or take away or lower the front wings to reduce the downforce on the front of the car. Now, it's easy to get up to a point where you have too much wing. It'll make the car feel real good in the corner. You can use a lot of throttle through the corner, a lot of cornering speed, but it kills your straightaway speed. More wing relates to more downforce, but the key is it's a lot more drag, and it'll kill your straightaway speed. Too little wing, the car will not have much drag, so theoretically it should be fast down the straightaway. But because you've taken away downforce, your cornering speed is tremendously reduced. And when you reduce the corner speed, you can't get on the throttle as quick coming off the corner. When you can't get on the throttle as quick, it shortens up the straightaway that you're about to enter. As you shorten that straightaway, it kills the straightaway speed. So too little wing, even though it's less drag, might also reduce your straightaway speed.
One of the areas where you can really dial in your race car is in what we call toe. Now, that's the way the tires are set on the front end of the automobile. If you have your tires leading out just a little bit in the front, that's called toe out. If you want to put them in a little bit, that's toe in. Each team will adjust the toe on their car to make it track the way they want it to. In big sweeping corners, you adjust that toe to compensate for the turning radius.
If you try to run too much toe in into the car, a couple things are going to happen. Number one, you're going to increase the drag on that car, which is going to slow it down in a straight line. Number two, you're going to cause excessive tire temperature in those front tires. As you increase the tire temperature, its ability to adhere to the racetrack is going to decrease, and therefore you're going to cut down your cornering speed. Too little toe in at the front of the car is only good for one thing. That's good straight line speed. The problem is the car is going to be very unpredictable. The driver is going to have a lot of trouble keeping the car going in a straight line, and it's going to be hard to predict when to turn in and to try to hit the apex of any particular corner you're chasing.
When you boil handling down to its basics, the most important factor is how much tire patch can you put to the road. So what crews do is they adjust the performance of their tires to match the configuration of the racetrack. Now, going in a straight line, you have no problem putting a big patch down onto the track. But if you're in the corner and you turn your wheel, you may lose some of the adhesion, especially in one area or another of the tire. So what teams do is they add camber to their car. They literally turn the wheel a little bit so that the tire is at an angle going straight. But when it turns and goes into a corner, the tire patch gets flatter and bigger on the racetrack.
The camber is very critical into the handling characteristics of a car. Camber basically is how much the top of the tire is tilted in from the bottom of the tire. It looks like you want to have a big tire patch on the ground by having the tire flat for the straightaway situation. But the car will get through the corner a lot better if you put some negative camber in the right side of the car, and actually you need some positive camber in the left side of the car. If you try to run too much camber in the right side tires, for instance, what happens is it won't slow the car down for a lap or two, but what's going to happen is you're going to increase the heat and the temperature of the tire on the inside of the tire, if you're talking about a right side tire. As you increase that temperature, after a few laps, that tire is going to go away. It's going to get too hot and it's going to start losing traction. Too little camber, especially too little negative camber on the right side of the car, will cause the car not to be able to get through the corner quick enough. As you put a side load in the car, the G-forces in the car will want to flatten the tire out. If it's flat entering the corner and now you throw the G-force into it, it's going to roll over on the outside edge of that tire. It'll heat the outside edge of the tire and you won't have the adhesion you need to get through the corner as quick as you want.
As the racetrack changes, and as the race car itself has a change, like the burning off of fuel, the way the race car sits on the racetrack changes. Now, what you can do to adjust for it is shift the weight. You use a device called the sway bar. There's one in the front and one in the rear. Two little handles in the cockpit. So as fuel goes down, you can just notch those sway bar settings. That changes the artificial weight on the corner, and as a result, the car continues to handle just the way you want it.
The sway bars in the car allow the driver to make an adjustment while he's on the racetrack. It goes from soft to hard. You're controlling the roll angle of the car, the stiffness of the chassis as it enters the corner. Again, the big aspect that's important to the driver is to be able to control that. If the balance of the car is not right, if you have some understeer, then you'll want to soften up that front sway bar. It allows the car to roll a little bit better. It gets better traction in the front, and you might be able to eliminate that understeer that you're experiencing.
In the Indy Racing League, there are two tire companies at battle each and every week. Firestone and Goodyear go head-to-head in competition, taking the latest technology and trying to make it work on the racetrack. Why? Well, quite simply, the old adage comes into play. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday.
The Indy Racing League is lucky to have the participation of two great tire manufacturers, alphabetically, Firestone and Goodyear. Now, both of these two companies have contributed to the long history of the great Indianapolis 500, each with more than its share of great victories. Now, head-to-head in constant competition in the Indy Racing League is making them work harder and harder. Higher levels of technology, more competition. It's just another tactic that the driver and teams have available to try and score a victory. And for the tire companies, it means something that transfers directly to a passenger vehicle and makes them better and safer.
Roll around an Indy Racing League track and you'll hear crews and drivers constantly talking about stagger. Now, what is stagger? Well, quite simply, it's the circumference of each of the tires, on the right side, the outside, or on the left side, on the inside. Now, if you were just driving down a straightaway, you would have the same circumference, and the wheels and the car would go straight. But the fact that you're turning on an oval, you want the car to be predisposed to turn left. How do you do that? Add stagger. Have the outside wheel a little bit bigger than the inside wheel. Then if you rolled, it will automatically, without any assistance, begin to lean towards the left, making getting through the corners a lot easier.
tire compound is pretty much dictated by the tire manufacturer. Both Goodyear and Firestone will bring probably two choices of compounds. One that'll be a little harder than the other. The softer the compound, normally the faster the cornering speed. But as you go soft, you also develop heat. As you develop heat, the length of time that the tire is good is reduced tremendously. So soft compound, more temperature, faster corner speeds, but for not very many laps.
The choice of tire compound can make an amazing difference in the way a car handles. Now, each tire company comes to the track with two compounds in the Indy Racing League. One a little bit softer than the other. Now, if you go soft, you may go fast, but then the tire may wear quicker. If you go hard, you may not be as fast, but you might be consistently faster over the run of the race. So how you select them and where you put those compounds can make a difference.
In racing, tire companies are concerned about compound. Now, they don't have to build a tire that's going to last 30 or 40,000 miles. Quite simply, they have to build a tire that will perform between two pit stops. The optimum performance comes in that period. One way to make that work is to measure the compounds. If it's a cold weather day, you may need a little softer compound than, let's say, on a hot weather day. Now, in the Indy Racing League, you generally can bring two choices of compound. Also, you can change the construction and the compound choice from the right side to the left side due to the fact that the loads are different going around through the corners. This is all a little bit of a black art, and many people are very secretive about it. But everybody is always concerned, what compound should we go with for this specific track? The radial technology that we see in use in tire construction nowadays has added a whole new variable to the performance of a tire. Crews have discovered that a simple change in air pressure by as little as 1 pound can dramatically affect the performance of a specific tire. So throughout the course of a race, you'll oftentimes hear a crew chattering back and forth as to whether they should go up or go down on the air pressure. That will make a big change in the handling on the race car.
Well, if you're like me, when you're filling your tires with air, you pay some attention to the tire pressure, but if it's within a pound or two, that's fine. Race driver can't do that. As a matter of fact, tire pressure is one of the key ways that they can make very minute adjustments in a car's handling. During a segment in between pit stops, the driver feels what the car is doing, and if it needs a little adjustment, one of the things he can do is radio back to add or detract some tire pressure. But when he's talking about tire pressure, it could be as little as 1/2 a pound and make a world of difference.
Tire pressure is a very effective way to change the balance or the handling characteristics of the car. By adding a pound of air pressure to the right front, you'll increase the spring rate of the right front tire, therefore stiffening that corner of the car and affecting the balance or the handling of the car as it goes through the corner. If you get too much air pressure in the right front tire, it's going to stiffen that corner substantially and probably cause the car to understeer. As you take air pressure out of the right front tire, you actually soften the front end of the car. That will cause the front end of the car to turn better, to stick harder, and therefore could cause an oversteer condition in your race car.
One of the rules introduced in the Indy Racing League is the requirement that all teams use the same standardized gearbox. Now, what this has done is save teams a lot of money. No longer do they have to develop a highly sophisticated and very individually oriented gearbox system for their car. They can spend that money in other areas. The standard gearbox is an H pattern with 6 different speeds. Simply go up, then down, back up and over, back down again, back up and over, and back down again. 6 speeds, everybody's got the same thing. It makes it an even playing field.
These cars of the Indy Racing League use a fairly standard gearbox, one that is ordained by the league itself so that they can keep the cost of the gearbox down. Now, it's a gearbox that allows the change of gears as needed track to track. Matter of fact, if you just pull the back end off the gearbox, there are the gears. You slide them off the shaft, back on the shaft, and you're ready to go racing. The gearbox itself is a standard H pattern. First gear, second gear, up to third, all the way through the 6 gears, and you're racing.
With these 6-speed gearboxes, it enables the driver and the team to actually run more than one top gear. You might run 2 or 3 even top gears, where they might be just 10 points apart. Now, the higher the gear ratio, the better mileage you'll get. But as you drop into the 5th gear or a slightly lower gear ratio, you'll actually let the car go faster. It'll use more fuel, but it'll go faster for a short amount of time. With a 6-speed gearbox, it enables you to put a variety of gear ratios in that gearbox. Now this can really help you in restart situations. It's real important to be at the low end of an RPM range in whatever gear you're in when the green flag comes out. If you're close to the red line in 3rd gear, for instance, when the green comes out, you're going to have to shift it real quick. And that's going to enable the rest of the field to get a little bit of a run at you. So it's important to pick the right gear ratio and the right RPM for the speed that you want to catch that green flag at.
In an effort to create parity and also control costs, the Indy Racing League has instituted a series of rules that limit the chassis choices by individual teams. At present, you can choose between the Italian-made Dallara or the British-made G-Force. Now, while they create the same sort of downforce, their nuances are very subtle, but basically, it's the same package. Go with one, go with the other. You're going to be racing with the same combination. Rather than being forced to lease engines, which was the custom in the past to most types of IndyCar competition, the Indy Racing League has developed 2 distinct engine packages, one from Aurora and one from Infinity. In each case, the individual team purchases those engines for approximately $75,000. Then they are at liberty to do within the rules whatever they desire to the individual engine. They can come with a predetermined engine builder. He can massage and tweak and tune the engine for the specific car. Overall, it's a dramatic savings in cost. It also can create some interesting horsepower combinations.
Before the car goes on the racetrack, the static corner weights of the car determine how that car handles in the corner. Because we're turning all to the left on the oval tracks, you'll want actually more left rear corner weight than you have on the right rear. When you have more left rear, it causes the right front corner of the car to be a little bit heavier than the left front. And that seems to work and cause the car to drive through the corners a lot better. The static weight in each corner of the race car is determined by the spring heights on each corner of the car. There's 4 coil springs on the race car. You can control the weight on each corner of that car by adjusting the height or the tension on each spring in each corner of that race car. The driver can control his own destiny when he's on a racetrack in a certain segment of the race. If he's too abrupt on the braking and gets the nose to fall too quick, it could upset the chassis. As you upset the chassis, you're going to heat up the tires. As the tires heat up, you're going to compound your handling problems. So getting on the brakes too hard, accelerating too fast, turning the car in too tightly or too abruptly, he can compound a handling problem. If you have a slight understeer and you're too abrupt with your steering maneuvers or your throttle positions, you're going to compound your problem. And the tires are going to heat up, and the car is going to get slower and slower. Trailing throttle oversteer, a situation where if the driver has to jump out of the throttle because something surprises him just in front, if he does that and has a turning input at the same time, it could cause the car to become an oversteer condition or the back end to jump out from him. After the first few laps of a race, a driver needs to settle into some form of rhythm. That becomes easier to do as you have traffic to follow and a groove to get into. The term that's sometimes used is what we call power braking, actually using both the throttle and the brake pedal together. This will do a couple of things. It'll allow you to get into the corner harder and without upsetting the race car. If you just jump out of the throttle and jump onto the brakes, it has a tremendous effect on the weight balance of that car and can be very upsetting to the chassis. Using both pedals together, you get the car slowed down without upsetting the chassis. You can keep the power down and the back end of the car secure by applying both the throttle and the brake at the same time. If you can't adjust the handling problem from the cockpit, then you need to tell the crew on the stop to make adjustments. You either need to add front wing, take away rear wing, that's one of your options, or you need to decrease the air pressure in the right front tire and increase the pressure in the right rear tire to help eliminate that understeer condition. If the car is experiencing a understeer condition or pushing condition in a segment of the race, the driver only has a couple options to do. One is his sway bar adjustments. He can soften the front sway bar, stiffen the rear sway bar. That will help alleviate somewhat of that problem. Other than that, he's just got to use the throttle and not try to abuse the car. If he tries to use too much throttle or go through the corner too fast, he's going to heat up that right tire. As it gets hotter and hotter, the car's handling will deteriorate further and further. So he's got to use his head, be smart with the throttle, and hopefully catch it with his sway bars. If the problem's too severe and you can't make the adjustments from inside the cockpit, you must wait till the pit stop. If you've got that oversteer condition, the first thing you'll want to do is try to add rear wing to the car to settle that back end down. You could also take front wing out, but then you're decreasing the downforce in the car. So you'd be better off probably adding rear wing. Now, in addition to the wing adjustments, what you could also do is add air pressure to the right front or take air out of the right rear. Many times in a race, you'll follow a car that you're faster than for a couple laps to try to determine where you have the biggest advantage on that car that's right in front of you. Sometimes you know that right away. You've seen the car earlier in the race. Oftentimes it's going to take you 2 or 3 corners to figure out what his problem is. Does he have an understeering problem, an oversteering problem? Once you determine what the problem is and how severe it is, it'll give you a good idea of where to try to attack him in a certain part of that racetrack. Many times you'll follow a guy through the middle of the corner. You get to the middle and he's got an understeering problem. He's got to wait till this point before he can get back after the throttle. If your car's working good, you might be able to get on the power that much quicker, this far back in the corner. What's important to do is not to try to get too close to this guy on the exit. Too close at that point will cause you to lose the downforce in the front of your car. These cars need good clean air to produce their downforce. If you're too close to the guy before you get to the exit point, he'll take away your front downforce. It will cause the car to want to go right towards the wall and you have to lift back out on the throttle. So the key is timing your exit so you don't get too close until you're in a straight enough line. You're going to still lose the downforce on the front end of your car, but if you've already got the car virtually straight and headed down the straightaway, you don't need that much downforce. You can go ahead, move to the inside, and try to take the momentum and make the pass. Making a pass at the end of a straightaway or on the entry to a corner happens for one of 2 reasons. First reason being that the back car was able to get off the previous corner faster than the lead car. Or secondly, they came off that corner together, and through the drafting, the back car, this car right here, got some momentum. He's able to get to the apex of the corner underneath the lead car, even though he has to miss his ideal turn-in spot. He's able to get to the apex. If he gets to the apex first, he's got the desired line. He can't carry as much speed on the exit because he's got a much tighter radius on the entry. But because he gets there first, he causes the lead car entering the corner to have to get out of the throttle. Therefore, he should be able to get on the power almost as quick as the first car on the entry and sustain the pass on the exit. Now, on the same passing scenario, if the lead car realizes he's going to be overtaken on the entry quick enough, he can set up the exit to try to get back underneath the car that just passed him. The car that's coming down low and passing on the inside, he's got a much tighter radius. He's not going to be able to get on the throttle as quick as normal. If the lead car realizes he's being overtaken sharp enough, does a late enough turn-in, he might be able to get the power down and come back underneath the car that just passed him on the entry as he exits the corner. On entering a corner, if the number 1 car is feeling pressure by the number 2 car on the entrance to the corner, oftentimes the number 1 car will try to block or protect his position. Many times that will cause
a phenomenon that we call early apex. He'll move down to block the inside lane. It causes him, if this is the proper apex point, oftentimes it'll cause him to get an early apex or hit it too soon. When he does that, he has to roll out of the throttle, and will cause his exit to be wide and slow. The two-car, obviously, at that point, will be able to take his normal line, be able to get into the power a lot quicker, and potentially make the pass on the exit. And it's because of the pressure that he put it on the number one car on the entrance to the corner that set up the passing opportunity on the exit. Let's assume that we've decided that this would be the proper apex position for this particular turn. We hear the term early apex, which means from the turn in, the driver actually turns either too quick or too sharp, and now touches the inside of the corner here. If that happens, it's an early apex. His only option is to roll out of the throttle. He's got to steer the car back to the right to keep from running off the inside of the racetrack. When he does that, he's got to get out of the throttle. He's going to shorten up this straightaway, and he's pretty much ruined that lap time. Okay, we covered an opportunity to pass with a early apex situation. The same could be true with what we call a late apex type situation. Again, if the one car is feeling pressure by the two car on the entry to the corner, he might be looking in his mirrors. He might be overly concerned about what the back car is doing, the two car is doing. This could cause the one car to actually miss the apex or have a late apex. He's sort of missed the corner, basically. He's rolled out of the throttle or missed his turn-in point, causing him to have a late apex. If you have a late apex, you're going to again have to roll out of the throttle. As he rolls out of the throttle, he's going to have a slow exit speed, again giving the car in the back the opportunity to hit the right apex, carry more speed off the corner, and make the pass on the exit of that turn. Many turns that you have to enter, there'll actually be a point that you'll have to use the brakes to slow the car down enough to negotiate the turn. We call that a braking point. Many of the tracks have what we call shut-off points. There'll be a 1 marker, 2 marker, or 3 marker. You'll try to pick out some distinguished mark on that racetrack, on the wall, some distinguishing mark that you'll use as a braking point. That's where you'll try to apply the brakes to slow the car down so you can hit the right apex and carry the most exit speed available. Every turn that you try to drive through will have 3 distinct points that you must find. They'll vary depending on the track and the speed and the conditions of that day. There'll be a turn-in point. That's a point on the outside of the racetrack that you keep the car close to the wall to the very last moment. You'll turn the car in and try to find the apex, which is the point on the innermost part of the racetrack that you try to clip. Now, if you get the right turn in and the right apex, it'll allow you to track out with the most throttle, the earliest in the corner, to apply that power, so you'll be able to exit the corner, again, with the most power down, and therefore increase the length of that straightaway that you're heading for. The blue line we have here on the diagram represents a constant radius turn. Now, many times you think that would be the way to sustain the most speed through a corner is with a constant radius turn. However, what we actually find out is that a later turn-in point, as we indicate here, does a couple different things. Number one, it increases the length of your straightaway that you're just coming off of. Therefore, you should be running faster by the time you get to this point as compared to that point. Obviously, at this point, with the later turn-in spot, you're going to have to turn the car sharper. So you have to set the car, turn it sharper from this point to that apex, but then the run out will again be on more of a constant radius to that exit point. Again, the key is where can we get the throttle back down to the floor? Many times it's just after the apex of the corner, somewhere in here. If you really hit this spot right and this spot right, you actually might be able to get on the power before the apex of that corner. therefore increasing the length of that straightaway. Now instead of a straightaway being from here to the end of that straightaway, you're actually going from this point, if we can get back into throttle that much earlier. So we increase the length of the straightaway. You increase the length of the straightaway on the entry, now you're trying to increase the length of the straightaway on the exit.
Another adjustment the driver has to help control the balance of the car is the brake balance. How much front brake in relation to rear brake the car is producing. He's got a knob inside the cockpit that he can change that balance from front brake to rear brake. For instance, if the car is understeering, you might have too much front brake on. You might want to move the brake bias to the rear, so you adjust the knob to put more rear brakes on the car. Vice versa to that, obviously, if it's oversteering. If it's oversteering, it might have too much rear brake, and there you'll adjust it the opposite direction to try to put more brakes on the front of the car, therefore trying to offset the oversteer condition the car might have in that particular segment. During a segment between pit stops, we're looking at somewhere between 25 and 30 laps of racing that the driver has to put up with the handling characteristics that he is given in that segment. Very seldom is the car going to be in what we call a neutral steer. It's either going to have one of two conditions. It's either going to understeer or oversteer. Now the good driver's not going to abuse the tire because he knows he's got to be out there for 20 more laps. If it's understeering, he needs to roll out of the throttle and not heat up that right front tire. The adjustments that he has to try to correct it are obviously the sway bars. He's got a front sway bar and a rear sway bar. He can control those, soften or stiffen them to try to help correct that problem. He's got a brake bias that on most tracks isn't going to be effective to help those problems. So he's got to drive it to the limit without abusing the tire and hope that he can catch the problem, whether it be understeer or oversteer, with the sway bars.